Welcome to this Grade 8 U.S. History Explainer on the Constitutional Convention and Compromise. Today, we're diving right into the intense debates, the deep divisions, and the massive compromises that literally built the foundation of the United States government. Here is our agenda for today. 1. A weak confederation. 2. Debating state representation. 3. Slavery and the Constitution. And 4. Ratification and political power. Let's kick things off with Section 1. A weak confederation and the absolute need for change. So, coming right out of the American Revolution, the brand new nation was, quite frankly, struggling. The Articles of Confederation had set up a really weak national league, and it just didn't have the muscle to fix the massive economic problems piling up. In early 1786, they tried to sort out commerce issues at the Annapolis Convention, but it totally flopped. Only 5 states even bothered to send delegates, but cause and effect quickly took over here. By February of 1787, a massive uprising of frustrated, debt-ridden citizens in western Massachusetts, which we know as Shays' Rebellion, lit a fire under the country's leaders. It gave undeniable urgency to the situation. This was hard evidence that a weak government just wasn't going to cut it, causing the Confederation Congress to authorize a secret convention. So, by May of 1787, 55 delegates had locked themselves in a room in Philadelphia to tackle the crisis head-on. Moving on to Section 2, Debating State Representation. It's the classic showdown of large versus small states. Almost immediately, the delegates decided to just completely scrap the old articles and write a brand new framework from scratch. But that brought up a huge glaring question. How in the world would representation be decided? Well, James Madison pitched the Virginia Plan. This called for a bicameral or two-house legislature, and representation would be proportional. That means it's based entirely on a state's population. Obviously, this was a massive win for heavily populated states like Virginia. But William Paterson wasn't having it. He fired back with the New Jersey Plan, countering with a unicameral or one-house legislature, where every single state would get an equal vote no matter their size. A clear move to protect the smaller states. All right, time for a quick pause check. Why exactly did delegates from those smaller states push back so incredibly hard against Madison's Virginia Plan? Think about what was really on the line for them here. Well, the immediate reasoning was a very real fear of losing their political voice entirely. Small states looked at the math and realized that proportional representation would let the most populous states just absolutely dominate the national government. They firmly believed that big states, especially Virginia, would use that built-in majority to constantly protect their own interests, leaving the smaller states out in the cold. To break this incredibly bitter deadlock, Roger Sherman of Connecticut stepped up. He offered what we now call the Great Compromise. He basically said, let's combine the best of both worlds. He proposed a bicameral legislature, where the upper house, the Senate, would have equal representation. 2 senators per state chosen by state legislators. Then the lower house, the House of Representatives, would have proportional representation based on population. It was a brilliant balancing act that finally satisfied both the large and small states, allowing the whole convention to actually move forward. Okay, into Section 3, Slavery and the Constitution and the Dark Compromise on Population. You see, the Great Compromise instantly created a brand new headache. Who exactly counts as part of a state's population? Slaveholders forcefully argued that enslaved people should be counted to boost a state's total population for representation. But Northern delegates, some of whom were deeply opposed to slavery, fought back against this. This horrific clash directly resulted in the infamous 3/5 Compromise. It's a striking example of cause and effect in action. The whole issue of representation was directly tied to taxation. Slave states caused the conflict because they wanted the political power of higher representation, but they also wanted tax breaks. So what was the effect? The delegates struck a deal that 3 out of every 5 enslaved people would be counted for a state's overall population. By adding 3/5 of their human property to the official count, slave states gained a massive, completely disproportionate advantage in political power in the new House of Representatives. And the compromises regarding slavery certainly didn't stop there. Delegates from places like South Carolina and Georgia actually demanded that the Atlantic slave trade continue forever. Other delegates argued that relying on enslaved labor completely betrayed the principles of the American Revolution. Ultimately, they just kicked the can down the road. They literally wrote into the Constitution that Congress could not ban the Atlantic slave trade before the year 1808. With that protected, South Carolina actually dropped its push for an even stronger fugitive slave clause. And why did Northern delegates accept this? Well, partly because the Confederation Congress had literally just passed the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which banned slavery in the future states of the Northwest. So they felt political power was at least somewhat balanced for the time being. Now for Section 4, ratification and political power, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. So, once this draft constitution was finally sent out to the states for ratification, a massive, nationwide public debate absolutely exploded. On one side, you had the Federalists. They claimed a centralized republic was unequivocally the best path forward. Their main evidence? The Constitution's brilliant system of checks and balances, which they argued would stop any single group from seizing too much power. On the flip side, the Anti-Federalists strongly claimed this new constitution was a fast track to tyranny, basically mimicking the corrupt British regime they had just fought against. Their evidence was that power was being stripped away from local state governments, and, crucially, that this new constitution was entirely missing a Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties. To build up evidence and really sway public opinion for the Federalist side, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay teamed up to write a wildly famous series of essays. In Federalist number 10, Madison went right after the fear of political factions. He wrote, quote, "A republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking." Madison was arguing that a large republic run by elected representatives was a far better shield against the chaos of direct democracy and the extreme dangers of political factions. Okay, time for our second pause check. After all these intense debates, the massive compromises, and the final ratification of the Constitution, who actually gained full citizenship and political power in this shiny new republic, and who was left entirely out of the picture? The immediate reasoning behind the power structure of this new government was heavily tied to property. Despite all those soaring revolutionary ideals about equality, the historical evidence is pretty clear. Full citizenship and the actual right to cast a ballot were strictly guarded. Political power was gained exclusively by free, white males who met specific taxpayer or property qualifications. That deliberately excluded women, Native Americans, enslaved people, and even free white men who didn't own property from having any real voice in their new national government. Finally, Section 5, Recap and Final Question. Let's summarize the convention. Let's quickly recap the incredible cause and effect of this whole era. First, a dangerously weak Confederation and the economic shockwaves of Shays' Rebellion directly caused the 1787 Constitutional Convention. Once there, the Great Compromise saved the day by resolving the fierce Virginia versus New Jersey debate, creating a bicameral legislature. Then, the tragic 3/5 Compromise handed disproportionate political power right over to the slaveholding states. In the end, the Federalists successfully made the case for a centralized republic, defeating the Anti-Federalists to secure ratification. Yet, the final result of all of this was a national government where full political power was exclusively reserved for wealthy property-holding white men. And that wraps up our explainer for today. I'm going to leave you with this final transfer question to chew on. How might the compromises made back in 1787 to satisfy completely different factions be reflected in the way modern political debates are settled today? Thanks so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning history.